what do I know to be true about Amber? Did I know that her brain was ever going to come back? No, I didn't know that. I mean, she could have brain fog for the rest of her life. Um, but what I knew is that even on her foggiest days, she's one of the best writers I know. And so I knew she could write the book. I knew who she was deep down. And so you just continue to call out the things you know to be true about each other until they find their footing. Like you tell them, there's the next foothold, and there's the next handhold, and there's the next move until they're like, oh, yeah, I have my feet under me. I can move now. And you just keep doing that and just keep calling it out as true.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact and donate. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy, it only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app you're using right now and hit 5 stars. It really is that easy. Thank you so much. Previous guests on the show have included Beth Paz, Karen Swallow Pryor, and Craig Westhoff. You can go back, listen to those episodes, and more. But today's guests are Amber and Seth Haines. Amber C. Haines is the author of Wild in the Hollow, on Chasing Desire and Finding the Broken Way Home, and The Mother Letters. Seth Haines is the author of Coming Clean, which is the winner of a Christianity Today Book Award of Merit, and the Book of Waking Up. Together with Tsh Oxenreider, he co-hosts a podcast, A Drink with a Friend. Amber and Seth have experience speaking at conferences and events. They live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, with their 4 boys. Amber, Seth, and I talk about their latest book, The Deep Down Things, which details the story of Amber's abuse in the church and her decision to step away. In the despair of loss, confusion, and disillusionment, a lifeline of hope was given. Seth and Amber give us practices and examples of what it looks like to find hope in the times of despair. We talk about calling out the truth of who people are, setting signs that can point to hope, attachment to Christ through adoration, the embodied power of the Eucharist, and practicals like trail running and gardening. Join us as we find signs of hope when we are in the pit of despair. Here's my conversation with Amber and Seth Haines. Amber and Seth, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have both of you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Amber, I'd love to start with you. And as we dive into some practices for growing hope in the times of despair, your new book, Deep Down Things, you're writing a lot about some difficult issues, difficult things, some things that you and Seth both experienced in your life where it brought you to this point of despair. And I know it's hard to talk about hope in the times of despair without actually talking about the despair.
Right.
Can you start to bring us into your story of hopelessness and despair?
Sure. I mean, I actually think it starts with a little bit of a mountaintop before it nosedives a little bit. So perspective is everything. I was working, really felt so fulfilled in my vocation as a woman in ministry. And we had started attending a small church that we loved very much. And it was kind of one of those all hands on deck types of situations where everyone is really becomes really close really quickly. But there were a lot of needs, and those needs were really just presence. And I got to do that. I had been a stay-at-home mom and an author. And so I had been meeting with women multiple days a week. I loved it. I was writing sermons. I was experiencing just such great joy. And we hired someone as a church that we really believed in. And he acknowledged all of my gifts. And like it actually in a really powerful way that made me feel so incredibly lucky to be seen and acknowledged, especially as a woman in the church. And that's kind of the beginning of it. And that relationship with that leader actually really changed and turned pretty dark and manipulative, so much so that I had to step away from my vocation. And really, you don't mean to make your identity, your vocation, your identity, but you don't know how much you do it until you have to step away from your vocation. You don't know how much it defines you and how you spend your time, your money, your thoughts. So stepping away from my vocation and having to make the choice to step away from that church to be safe was just a nosedive for me. Yeah. And so Seth saw it coming for a while before it hit and had been waving all the red flags. And I kept dismissing him because being a woman in ministry is hard.
It's difficult. So how were you experiencing that time, Seth, as you were seeing Amber go through a manipulation, some abuse, some difficult things within her church, and she has the desire to serve and to love others well and to be recognized as a contributed member of the church, going through an ordination process, but you were seeing some destructive things that were happening. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it sucked, man. Can we say sucked on this
Yeah, you can
podcast?
say
Because I
sucked.
just did. Yeah, it sucked really bad. Man, it's really difficult because on the one hand, you want to wave the red flags and you want to say, hey, there's some dangerous patterns here, and hey, there's some things that aren't quite right, and it wasn't just us. Like, to be super clear, it wasn't just Amber going through difficulties. It was something that was experienced by a broader swath of people in the church, and it was kind of over time. And so one person would sort of leave and say, here's some patterns that I noticed, and another person would leave and say, here's some patterns that I've noticed. And but you're so in the thick of things that it's really easy to kind of dismiss those as like disgruntled church members, right? Because we all know we're disgruntled church members. So on the one hand, I was, doing my best to try to support the church, which needed some leadership and some continuity and some stability. I was also trying to support Amber, who, felt vocationally like this was her path forward. So there was a sort of a desire to help her weather the storm too. But at the same time, I knew it was not good. And so for me, even though I was, leading worship there every week, pretty much, I just kind of checked out. I mean, there was one point where I told Amber, listen, if you want to keep doing this, you can, but I'm done. Like, I'm out. I'm not following this guy anymore. And of course I said that behind closed doors. And of course, it was like, well, you can't leave me now, but there was kind of a point where I just sort of checked out, and I actually started exploring moving in a different direction as far as just church membership went. So I don't know if that's a great way to deal with it, but it is how I dealt with it.
Well, I think it's important to know how we deal with these things and how the reality of it looks like. And sometimes we have an idealized version of what it can look like. We want to repair and fix and reconcile and make sure that we could stay with this person, or we have dreams that everything will turn out okay and people can shift and change. But when you're realizing that, one, that reconciliation or shifting and changing is not going to take place, and two, recognizing that not many people will listen to or hear your story of what was happening, how does that shift the way that you start to interact in the world, in the place, when it feels like hope is lost?
For me, that the part where you ask about telling your story and not necessarily being heard, that's where the trauma, that's where the pain actually took place. the actions and behavior of our priest, like it was bad, but we were very able to outline everything that happened. We were able to name it as bad and not okay. But when we ask for help, when we tell this story, and then the church protects itself, and as opposed to and actually covered our story. That was a huge part of the pain, and actually my disintegration into a loss of my voice, because my voice, when I gave it, asking for help, it got no response. And so my voice stopped mattering. It didn't matter. It didn't feel like it mattered. Even though I believe those dear, dear people who loved us very much, they didn't know how to handle this. They loved us. They would have said, your voice totally matters. But the way that all of that was acted out, the actions were opposed that love. And so it's been a rebuilding from there, and it's been a long rebuilding. And a lot of those people have journeyed with us to rebuild. So it's been good in the long run.
And the short run is really difficult. And so you're sitting in despair. And so Seth, if you could just name, as you guys are in this place now, I would assume, and I've been in a place of despair, and it almost feels like an out of body experience. It feels like you are outside looking at your situation. And a lot of your book and the deep down things, what you write about helps us all in these difficult times to start to feel grounded, embodied, like we can be a part of our body again. What has been a practice, Seth, for you to then help get us back into this place of embodiment?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many, but the primary one, especially in that season, so it was really interesting. Amber went through sort of that terrible meltdown. That was in mid to late 2019 and early into 2020. And then right on the heels of that, we all entered in, the pandemic. We were all in lockdown. And so there was sort of a new sort of despair that set in. And frankly, that was kind of good for us because in a lot of ways, it stopped us. It sort of stopped everything and made us sort of deal with what was in front of us. It brought a lot of people that were even in that process to stop and to say, like, what actually did happen last year. A lot of the church leaders actually stopped and said, what actually did happen last year, and began to sort of wrestle with what had happened. And so there was that process of stopping that was super helpful in the moment. And I know that may not sound like a super embodied practice, but the idea that you've got like so much momentum and so much movement that you can't stop and think and contemplate and understand what was happening. The pandemic made us do that, and it made us do that as a community. So there was a bit of a little community piece that was super helpful, just the stopping. But for me personally, when the pandemic set in, I got really serious about my health, primarily because I'm an asthmatic. And in the early days, everybody was freaking out about people with, existing conditions. And I had that. So I started trail running a whole lot. And for me, the idea that I could sort of leave the world behind, flee from the world, kind of get out to the trail, let my mind run loose, feel my body, feel the hard breathing, feel the sweat. It just really burned off a lot of the anxiety, the angst of that season, a lot of the anger I dealt with on the trails. So there was a part of getting into my body and making my body do hard things that reminded me that, listen, I'm still alive. I'm still upright. I'm still moving forward. Today's this run, and tomorrow's another run, and the next day is another run, and the days keep coming, and that's a good thing, right? And my body reminds me that that's a good thing. For me, that was the really embodied practice that helped ground me, particularly in that season.
There is something about putting one foot down in front of the other that does ground us. It wires our brain in such a way and that connects us to creation and it connects us to God. It connects us and it starts to slow our bodies down in a way that we can start to focus and concentrate. And I love that practice. And I think, what I have been doing, and I think my wife has been doing is a lot of walking. We're not quite the runners, but we are the walkers. And we do a lot of walking. Amber's raising her hand. She's one of those. But I think just putting one foot in front of the other, I don't know if there has been something that has helped me more than going and being able to engage in listening to God and letting him know all of the difficult things that I'm going through, but really being in that place of silence and listening to him on a walk has been really helpful for me in those process. How about you, Amber? Is there a practice that helped you feel more embodied?
I would say gardening is just it. Every day of the year, even when flowers are not growing, there's work to do in a garden space. And it's the place where I do the most deliberate thinking, scientific thinking, but also where my brain kind of floats off in a good way, where maybe I get in what people call a flow state, where I'm going from one thing to the next and my brain is just it lets go a little and is able to kind of like meander into some corners that I normally wouldn't, sit and go to on purpose. So that is just so helpful for me, that practice of being outside and sticking my hands in the dirt. But I will say that for listeners who are in despair or in deep relationship with people who are in a dark place, when you hear people say, oh, just start walking or trail running, and some people are sitting there going, I'm having a hard time getting up and brushing my teeth every day. And so there was a season. So when I was in what I call the dark place, and I got COVID on top of that, I really, my brain kind of shut down for a while. Like actually, factually, I wasn't just depressed. The brain fog, that's just how COVID got me. And it lasted for a very extended period of time. And I really thought, this is just how I am now. I am not a thinker anymore. And I had to learn to celebrate very, very, very small things. Getting up, there was a time that I put on my makeup and thought, you know what, I remember enjoying this, and I really love makeup. And that may seem so silly, but there was a day that I thought I used to celebrate my beauty as a woman, like enjoy being pretty, like dress up. And it seems so goofy and surfacey, but it's important. And sometimes we have to choose a thing to be grateful for, because we do engage more than we give ourselves credit.
How do you, when you don't feel grateful for anything and you don't want to celebrate the small things of putting makeup on and looking pretty one day, how do you do that? Is there a way that others can help engage you in that? Or is it something that just needs to come from inside of you?
Yes. I almost think Seth could answer this question a little more, because he held out hope for me when I didn't have it for myself. And I actually think that there were days, particularly in the writing of the deep down things, when I kept telling Seth, I can't write this book. And he would just say, yes, you can. And even though I literally all the way 100% believed that I couldn't do it, I would get up and start writing because he said I could. And I was like, I believe you think that I can. So I'm going to just put some words on the page. It's totally going to be crap. And then I would be like, oh, wow, I just uncovered some things and I'm still a writer. And it's not because he said I could. I was still a writer. But I do think that we do name things for each other. That's what we do for each other, not just married people. That's what you do for people you love. You name what you see and what you know to be true about each other. And Seth did that for me.
When you hear that, Seth, what are you thinking when she's saying, naming what is true about Amber in the midst of despair?
Yeah, I think a lot of things, I guess. The hardest thing when somebody is really hurting and you've had any sort of life experience or life trauma at all, and you know that saying something like, oh, it's going to be okay, or tomorrow's a new day, or whatever, is not going to cut the mustard, right? Like, it's not going to work. I think the hardest thing is figuring out ways to call the truth out in other people in a way that feels attainable and tangible and graspable. I have a really good friend. His name is Joseph, and Joseph was kind of in this whole, milieu of our church with us and kind of going through rough stuff. And there was another friend named Nicholas, and he's in the book. He was on the vestry. There's a chapter dedicated to him. Essentially, it's the forgiveness chapter. But Nicholas was kind of lost for a little season in this swirl because he was leading the church through, and he was trying to suss out both sides of the story, and it was very complicated, and it was his first time to ever go through anything like this, and so trying to figure out, what to do and how to move. And I remember at one point, Joseph said, "I just don't have any hope that this is going to get resolved." And I said, "Well, I guess it depends on resolution, what you mean by resolution, because I don't necessarily have hope that it's going to be resolved, but I do have hope that Nicholas is going to see and move in the right direction, and I'm not going to have to say anything. I'm not going to have to do anything." And Joseph said, "Why do you believe that so much?" And my response was, "I know Nicholas." And I think that's part of what it means to carry out hope, or to carry hope when other people are in despair, is just stopping and asking yourself, like, what do you know is true about that person? What do you believe to be true about that person? And what can you say that is true about that person, either to their face or behind their back, that demonstrates a different sort of approach, that demonstrates a hopeful approach? And so even in that season with Amber, that was kind of the same idea, that the same approach was just, what do I know to be true about Amber? Did I know that her brain was ever going to come back? No, I didn't know that. I mean, she could have brain fog for the rest of her life. But what I knew is that even on her foggiest days, she's one of the best writers I know. And so I knew she could write the book. I knew who she was deep down. And so you just continue to call out the things you know to be true about each other until they find their footing. Like, you tell them, there's the next foothold, and there's the next handhold, and there's the next move, until they're like, oh yeah, I have my feet under me, I can move now. And you just keep doing that and just keep calling it out as true.
Mm. We were just had a little gathering of some of our missionaries and our workers in North America. We were going over some emotional health type of work, and one of the things my friend said was that when you're in this deep pit of despair, Jesus will crawl into the pit with you and start to illuminate the darkness. And it reminded me of your chapter on communion, on the Eucharist, of actually ingesting the body and blood of Jesus and having that go deep inside of us, and actually the embodiment of Jesus being there. He's with you in it. So Amber, how did the Eucharist and how did the body and blood of Jesus help ground you in that pit of despair?
It is the whole thing. The body and blood of Jesus is the whole thing. I wish I knew a more beautiful way to say that. When I came to faith, that I wasn't praying to become a believer. I wasn't praying for God to rescue me. I was praying to die. And so when I didn't die, this is very early, I'm 19 years old. When I didn't die, I believed that God got me out of the floor, and that it was his body, that it was his blood that got me up. and that if I stopped believing, I would be gone, like physically. And so I had a metaphysical experience from the beginning. I didn't know that it would lead me to this belief about the Eucharist, that his body and blood would literally indwell me when I partake in the Eucharist, when I receive the broken body of Jesus, and that he would empower me to get up and keep walking even when I didn't feel like moving. What can be named that is more powerful than a God that gives his body to you? And so to participate with that as often as we can, or to sit in an adoration chapel, present with the body and blood of Jesus, who is God, who is present everywhere all the time, but particularly present in the Eucharist. It made it to where we could move forward at all in multiple directions, and led me to forgiveness. It led me to, all the ways that he's healing the church all the time. But it's a pretty dark ditches that he'll meet us. Yeah.
Mm. It's beautiful. That just to think through of a God that will say, here's my body, here's my blood, and this is for you, and I'm going to give myself for you, is pretty incredible thing. It is the incredible thing that we have that. Seth, when you think of that, the practice of the Eucharist and ingesting the body and blood of Jesus, being there, having that embodied experience, what has that done for you, and what has that done for your relationship with God?
Yeah, so I've written 2 books about my sobriety journey, and I share parts in this book, the deep down things, but I also share parts in my last book, which was the book of waking up. And there was a moment right after I had stopped drinking. Stop being drunk is probably a better way. That's how I put it nowadays. Stop being drunk. We were together in a house gathering, a little house gathering, and somebody started passing around the elements, and about halfway around the room, everybody starts looking around and is like, "Oh crap, we're passing around wine," and Seth, is struggling with alcohol or coming out of dependency, and so what's he gonna do? And my friend Mike actually got up and went to the fridge and got white grape juice for me as a substitute, which I think is hilarious because it's super sweet, doesn't look like blood, it's nothing. I'm like, man, come on, dude. So the wine comes around to me, and I just thought, my grandmother was a recovering alcoholic, and she used to say, if my sobriety can't withstand the Eucharist, then it's not sobriety at all. And so when it came around to me, I took this hunk of bread and I dipped it in the wine, and I took this bite, and it sounds crazy, but it tasted like actual flesh and blood to me. Like, it actually tastes like when you were a kid and you fall off your bike and you like skin your palms and you like suck your palms to make the pain go. That's what it tasted like. And I remember leaving just completely crushed and telling Amber, like, we have to figure out what that was. Like, we have to get to the bottom of it. And that's what started really our sacramental journey, which was our journey of healing. And so to me, every time I go to the Eucharist, every time I go forward on a Sunday morning, or if we get lucky enough to attend a midweek or something, I'm just reminded that, like, this is the anchor for actual sobriety. And not just like, I haven't had a drink in 10 years and so I'm sober. Not that. But actual sobriety in the sense of saying, like, I can pick up a glass of wine and toast someone and then put it down and walk away, and I don't need it. Or sobriety meaning I've got all the money that I need right now and I'm not going to work anymore, or I really need to actually kind of hustle a little bit to go make money, but while doing that, I need to keep my mind focused on Christ. Like, the actual sobriety of being anchored to the thing that matters. to me, that is what the Eucharist has done. It has been the thing that constantly calls me back to the center, and that constantly reminds me of what it means to be truly sober, which is to be wholly attached to Christ and detached from everything else.
Mm. Then what are some ways of it's to be sober is to be wholly attached to Christ and detached from everything else? What are some other ways to start to attach to Christ? And I think especially, in these times when we're seeking hope, if we can attach to the hope bringer and the giver of hope and the giver of life, we can start to walk through. What are some ways to reorder our attachment towards Jesus and not to other things?
I mean, for me, it always started with just like asking, what are you attached to in the moment? I mean, a really good embodied practice is to ask yourself, what are you most worried about? And what do you find preoccupies the majority of your anxious headspace? And to write those things down, literally to write them down, to look at them on a piece of paper and say, holy mackerel, man, I spend, 3 hours a day worrying about X, Y, and Z, or and then not only do I worry about those things, here are the things that I do to medicate, to take my mind off of it, whether it's I'm out watching TV or go shopping or drink, or heaven forbid someone here's a heroin user, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Like actually name the things and go through the embodied practice of naming the thing that brings you anxiety, naming the thing that you use to numb, and then in prayer, in actual factual prayer, sitting down and saying, hey, God, here's the thing that's bringing me pain. Hey, God, here's the thing that I know I'm using to numb it. And in the words of Saint Benedict, then casting yourself upon the rock of Christ and saying, like, please help me. Please help me.
Amber, what does the figuring out your attachments look like for you in your life?
It's funny because I'm going to use wake up language like Seth's book, The Book of Waking Up. And we're talking about the deep down things. But I have had seasons where I have needed to wake up and have something snap my eyes open or shock me into seeing how very surrounded we are by beauty. And for me, beauty tends to do that. When I put myself in a place where I can clearly recognize beauty, I find an attachment to God. I found a deep sense of gratitude that otherwise I can't like conjure up when I'm in a dark place. And so nature sends me that direction. But I would have to say that my favorite thing is singing. I really, really, really love to sing. And I know that he made us to sing, even if we don't have good voices. Like he made us to use our voice. And my friend, who is actually Joseph's wife, Lindsay, she's a therapist, and she said that our vocal cords are actually connected with our, is it vagus nerve or vagal nerve? I don't remember the terms, but there's a
yeah, it's the vagus nerve.
There's a vagus nerve. Okay, so this calms us. He made us like this, and so when we're speaking the truth or singing the truth, and we are hearing something really beautiful, we are engaging our bodies that way. There's something for me that is like, there are strings that attach between me and who I'm worshiping. And I just think that God loves music.
God does love music. And I heard that even the practice of humming music, the actual vibration of the hum is going to stimulate that vagus nerve even more than melodic singing. So just the vibration of the hum, which I think is pretty amazing to be able to do that. And God created us in such a way where we could actually use these things that he's given us to calm our bodies, to get us grounded so we could start to move in a new direction. And as we start to move in new directions, one of the chapters you write, you talk about building a cairn, or like setting out signs for you and creating signs. And, I had to do that just a few weeks ago to build a couple of cairns for me in my life. I just came out of a 3-month sabbatical, which was incredible. Just being out in nature and connecting with God. His presence was there. I felt so attached to him. And then I jumped straight back into work and just, started to fly. And it was 2 months later. And I felt like I didn't actually create a sign for what's coming, what's new. There was no, like, here's the great thing that was, and this is the path that I had. And so thank you, God, for this path. And here's the path that I'm praying for and desiring moving forward. And so I just set out every rock that I set down. I said, thank you, God, for this, what happened in my sabbatical. And I then gave thanks. And then I set down rocks of my desire for what's coming in the future. And that creating those cairns and the sign for me has made all the difference. Like, I have a new path now. What were some of the signs that you started to create that started to help you move in a new direction?
I didn't mean to start collecting little religious figures, little icons. I just thought they were really neat and just strange and weird. I didn't grow up like that. I mean, I grew up when we passed the Catholic Church and you could see statues in the window. I was like, oh, we feel so sorry for them. They worship idols. Like, I'm serious. And so here I am as an adult. And if I go into any sort of resale shop or anything and I see a Mary, she's mine. And so I've brought them home and I have them everywhere. I'm looking at them all over the place. And I have my myrrh-bearing women, and I have a Black Mary right here and a tall Mary in gold. And something about seeing these women who existed in real life, who said yes to Jesus, who laid everything down and really created paths for Jesus' ministry to work, as strong supporters of Jesus' work. I mean, particularly his mama. And Mary Magdalene, I adore the women in scripture and the women in church history in particular for literally being icons of hope. And a lot of these people endured great traumas. I mean, and are martyrs, and were ridiculed by the church, ridiculed by the people who she was actually, the women were there for. But then we look back on their lives and see that they held strong, and they were actually being great reformers in the church all along. And so I would like to and endeavor to walk in their footsteps, who are, following in the footsteps of Christ.
Yeah. That's beautiful to be able to see the people of the past and say, this is what they embodied. This is how they started to work out their faith with Jesus. This is how they reformed the church, and start to say, hey, what can I learn and move in that direction? I think that is so helpful to us to be able to set those things up. There's a few other practices. Any other practices, Seth, that really stood out to you while you were writing this book that you gravitated towards? Like, this is one of your favorites.
Yeah, my favorite, hands down, and I actually had to cancel my hour recently because of just an insane period of work. But Amber and I both regularly practice adoration. And for those who aren't Catholic and wouldn't understand or wouldn't be familiar with the term, adoration is simply a time where you go into this little chapel. There's the sacrament's exposed at the front of the room, and you just sit there in silence. And the idea is to sit in silence and adore Christ, who made you, who is with you, who is around you, who is in all things, who's on the altar, but is also in the person in their adoration chapel with you in the moment. And to sit and pray and read and contemplate and do the things that we were created to do sort of outside of the busyness of the world. Ironically, I canceled my adoration hour for the foreseeable next few months because of the busyness of the world. So there are seasons when you ebb and flow in and out of these things. I mean, it's kind of the natural part of life. But for me, especially during the season that was so dark for Amber, like that was the thing that actually helped me stay sane. I wasn't drinking anymore, so it's not like I was, drinking my pain away. And there were nights where I would wake up so angry and so on fire, and the voices in my head were so crazy that until I would get to the adoration chapel, I literally felt like I was on fire. And there was something about that practice that just reminded me, hey, listen, I've been here from the beginning. I'm going to be here again tomorrow. I'm going to be here the next day. I'm not going anywhere. Lo, I am with you even unto the end of the age. There was something about the adoration chapel and the practice of adoration and adoring the one who's rescued me before that reminded me there is rescue for you again. And that was critical for me in those really, really dark seasons.
I think one of the things that's really beautiful about this story that you've written down is that you've written it together, and I know it was hard to walk through. And I think, Seth, you talked about how you were angry at times, and you felt like you were on fire. And I think you want to fight for your family. You want to fight for your wife. You want to make sure that she could get up and have hope and to move forward, and that she's not being abused and manipulated, and people are hearing her story. And it's starting to get me a little angry. And so how do we help each other, especially in a marriage relationship where one is going through hell? Like, how do we properly walk through it with other people, especially your spouse, so that there is some hope on the other side and there's some change on the other side, and we could get through it together, and we're not just going to blow it all up?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, because the truth is I didn't want to just fight for my marriage. I wanted to actually fist fight. I literally wanted to go fisticuffs and get in a brawl. So I don't know. And I think there's probably something about that's, that was helpful to Amber. I don't know. Something about, somebody standing up and saying, like, even if no one else fights for you, I'm going to fight for you. And part of my indignation was certainly my own rage about some of the things that were said and some of the manipulations that were applied. But some of it was just like, hey, man, you said you were for women, and then you completely screwed over this woman that you worked with. That is unjust, and you deserve justice brought to your doorstep. And so for me, I think a lot of it was just saying over and over again, like, if no one else fights for Amber, I will fight for her. And it may not look great sometimes. I may do it wrong sometimes. But not just for the sake of my marriage, but for the sake of my relationship with God, for the sake of my own soul. Like, I'm going to be honest about the fact that I am enraged and want justice.
I would say that when someone can reflect your pain and your anger back to you, that validating holy anger is incredibly healing, actually. But the day in, day out, I can tell you what he did. We had, our lives had been rooted in this little beautiful Anglican church, and then we were just gone from it. So just uprooted. And so that is when we started our Catholic journey, which became very ritualistic. And Seth became very ritualistic. And it was a counted on move that he was going to wake up really early in the morning and be praying. It was counted on that he would be going to adoration. I knew where his heart and his mind was. And so there were just some things that weren't questions. where we would go to worship. And so I feel like even if we were in pain, it was like our bodies were starting to live in ritual. And I hadn't realized how much that would save us.
It's really helpful to see what that starts to look like. Amber, if you could tell the audience one thing, what would you like them to get out of this book? What are you hoping that your readers would take away?
Truly, that they matter, and that their story matters. And I know a million books give this message, but if you have experienced despair, I hope that you would keep going. It's really, really simple. I hope that people will actually feel hope by acting it out. Act it out.
Good. Seth, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Just go be Catholic. like stop messing around. Stop messing around. You know what you're made to be. Go be what you are. I mean, there's a part of that I say tongue in cheek, but there's a part of that I really mean too. I wasn't ready until I was ready to make the faith journey. But I mean, I think we all have a place we're going, right? And I know that for everybody, it's not to go become Catholic, and I would never suggest that that's the case. But I think that we're all sort of moving in a direction, and there are all these little things that get in the way of us taking the next right step in that direction. And every time you give in to one of those blockades, you invite pain. And that's okay, because that's part of the process. But I wish at 21, I had been reflective enough to say, like, this is who I think I am, and I'm going to start walking in the direction and ignoring all these little barriers along the way, all the barriers of ego, the barriers of career, the barriers of, social pressure. And I'm just going to be really intentionally pursuing who I think it is that God's made me to be.
How about you, Amber? What would you say to your 21-year-old self?
It's probably going to have something to do with being okay to just be a mom, being okay to serve in your home. Like, I always really, really loved it. And I know this sounds so opposite of my actual kind of feminist beliefs about ministry and working in the world and showing up and really changing the world as a woman. It's very important, but I very much undervalued my place in my home and allowing myself to really love it there. So I would say cozy in. And actually say that you love it, because I did love it.
That's great. For both of you, anything that you have been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Yes. Does it have to be spiritual?
No, it doesn't have to be spiritual.
It's not. You kind of, this is, can I say this, Amber? I don't know. She might get mad at me for saying this. I have developed in my mid-40s my actual first celebrity crush. And it's on Selena Gomez, because we've been watching Only Murders in the Building, and it's the best. And her character is so cute that it just makes me giggle. And Amber laughs at me about that.
I do.
So yes, if you have not watched
fine.
Only Murders, watch Only Murders, and the third season is on fire. It's amazing.
All right, which of the Pickwick children did it? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. Only Murders. How about you, Amber?
I just finished Demon Copperhead. Oh, my mercy. Now, listen, it's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark. And I actually had to pray through some of it, because I thought, this is too painful. And if it doesn't pay off, I'm going to be really mad. But it pays off. It pays off, and it's so good.
Yeah. And yeah, King Oliver is a genius. She is so good. And
a genius. She nailed it.
Yeah. It's so amazing. My wife and I both read it, and my wife read it first. So Meredith constantly, she was like, "Oh, you got to hear this sentence." And so she would just share one sentence, and then like she would just get through that one page, and then she's like going to the next page. Oh, you got to hear this sentence. She could write, and she could write.
You can.
That's good. Both of you, Seth, Amber, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for actually diving deep into the deep down things and to despair, and showing us some practices to start to walk out the times of despair into hope. And I highly recommend this book. It's beautifully written. And so I would love people to sit with it, to read it. It was something that, we did with Barbara Kingsolver as we read sentences. I read some sentences of this book to my wife because they were so beautiful and beautifully written. So I really loved it. And I love the practices that you actually give, some handholds to say that we can start to embody this ourselves. It's not just here's the story, but here is some embodied practices that I think are going to help a lot of people. So thank you for that, and thank you for what you have written. I know that it's hard to unearth painful things and to give people your story and some hope, but thank you for sharing your story. And I heard it, I read it, I listened, and I'm praying for your journey ahead. So how can people connect with you guys, and how can people get your book?
Well, you can get our book anywhere books will be sold. Hopefully your local bookstore, you could ask for them to pick it up, or your library, you could ask for them to get it there, but it'll be on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that kind of stuff. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm Amber C. Haines on Instagram, and you can connect with me other ways through there.
And you can find me at sethhaines.com, and then just follow the links to my Substack, because that is where I'm doing most of my work these days.
It's great. Well, Seth and Amber, thank you so much for this conversation. I truly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review, and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes, and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.